Jake, welcome back to Wilshire.
Thanks, George.
So you should know that Jake, as Mark said, was in the second class of residence. That would have been 2003 to 2005. And at that time, we had Jay Hogwood, who came first, and he was
a first-class resident.
A first-class resident.
I was a second-class resident.
Okay, there you go. And Ann Bell Worley was your partner during that time. Now, I think it's interesting to note that while Jake was married to Erin at the time, and by the way, now they have Logan, who is three and a half?
Yes, heading towards 4.
All right. Since that time, Erin has herself made some decisions about calling, and by the way, she's preaching this morning in Georgia. So tell us about Erin's journey.
Certainly. Erin is the other Reverend Hall now. And so much of my time at Wilshire was so focused on me. Another great story about that time was the fact that my wife, who was a school teacher in Richardson, experienced her own call to ministry. And that had a lot to do with the church in which she worshipped. At Wilshire, Erin was able to see women leading in worship, their calls acknowledged and encouraged, and it was here and in conversations with her pastor that led us towards seminary for Erin and now ultimately to ordination. And so while we were in North Georgia, we served on staff together. And now primarily, now that we've moved to Macon to Highland Hills, the other Reverend Hall is a writer of curriculum. In fact, I think she's coming up in the uniform series of Smith and Helwis, and a number of other venues, speaking and preaching like she is today. And most importantly, she is raising our dear son, Logan.
Terrific. Now, Jake, we were, I suppose, learning. We were always learning in the residency program in terms of our learning how to do it, as well as residents. We were really starting out together back then.
It was the Wild West back then.
It was different. We were not terribly organized. We were finding our way, and yet you carried some things with you, I think. Yeah. You have always talked about how important the residency was. Yeah. You're in your second church since us now, not because you can't stay in one place, but because you had a fertile ministry where you were and felt a call now to Highland Hills. Tell us what the residency meant to you in terms of your effectiveness as a pastor.
Right. I think one of the things that I learned from Wilshire and from this program is to trust in the work of God. Young pastors are often under the illusion that this work is all about them, their gifts, what they have to offer, and that could lead down some dangerous roads in ministry, towards the burnout of the senior minister, or towards the minister thinking that this really is their church. What I learned at Wilshire is to trust that this is God's work, and that while I have a part to play in the life of a church, it is just that, a part of God's larger work. And so finding the health of a community is about us all finding what God has for us to do.
You probably have one of the highest EQs I know. That would be emotional intelligence. No, it's true. I mean, if you want to find a pastor who sort of gets what's going on in churches, Jake seems to have an intuition for that. But I think it's also important for pastors to kind of learn the story of a church and figure out how not to impose a story, but how to capture it and let it continue to play out and give leadership in that way. You've been in 2 churches now since here. What are the originating stories of those churches, and how have you learned to lead within that congregation and that story?
Right. You know, I think the first thing that I learned here at Wilshire that I have brought with me to these other contexts is that every church has a story. Wilshire has a story, and it's still unfolding. But I couldn't leave Wilshire and take the Wilshire story or even the Wilshire way, though I have enacted many practices I learned here at Wilshire in both congregations, baby dedications especially, You can't take one church's story and transplant it to another. And so at my first church in North Georgia, Heritage Baptist Fellowship, this was a church that was 14 years old at the time, a church born out of conflict with another church. And much of the pastoral work there was about helping that church see its life beyond the incidents of its birth. And to see that their life was born in God and not in the particular instance of conflict that birthed their congregation, a painful church split. The church that I am at now has never split. It was this kind of spontaneous neighborhood church that came to be. Imagine this, 5 families get together. I know that sounds like a mafia story. And truth be told, it may work like a mafia story at our church. 5 families got together in their neighborhood and said, you know what, there's not a church on this side of town. And I'm tired of crossing the river to go to church. Probably at First Baptist, where Scott Dickinson
is the pastor, right? Yeah.
And so 5 families, they took a poll in the neighborhood, and because the neighborhood was mostly Baptist, they became a Baptist church. And so this sense of creativity and the place means a lot to that church. That place means a lot. And now much of the pastoral work at Highland Hills is looking now back across the river where most of the people live, at ministries that need to be launched back to the rest of Macon and not held tightly in our beautiful grounds.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Jake, we're proud of all you're doing, and we're grateful for your leadership among the residents and the alumni, too. What you don't know is that Jake and Amy Grizzle Kane are kind of the co-leaders of the, shepherds of this flock that is everywhere.
We are the good cop and bad cop when it comes to residency attendance at weeks like this week.
Yes, good.
Amy's the good cop.
Right. Well,
and I'm not.
Both of you are needed, and thank you for all that you do in your affirmation of the continuing program here.
Thank you, George.
Bless you. Okay.